All right, everybody. All right, welcome. I hope everybody's having a meaningful day. I say a meaningful day rather than a wonderful day because today is the 17th of Tammuz, a fast day. There is a general principle in Judaism that a event doesn't make the day, but rather the day draws to it events, or the day causes events throughout. Any other culture, et cetera, et cetera. A certain event occurs on the day, and that makes that day stand as a day in history. It could be a wonderful day, or it could be a sad day. But the event what defines that this day should be a significant day in the calendar. In Judaism, we have a general principle that there are days that are set aside for good things and days that are Yom Muchan Leperoniot, a day that's set aside for a catastrophe or for negative occurrences or events. One of those days is today, the 17th of Tammuz. The first recorded incident that is associated with today is that this is the day that Moshe came down the mountain holding the two luchot. He came down exactly on time, but the people thought he was late because they made an incorrect count. And they had assumed that when Moshe said, I'm going up for 40 days, that they would start counting immediately. But rather, 40 days was 40 complete days and nights, 40 days and 40 nights complete. And so they had to start from the end, from once that day that they were in had ended and the new day had begun. That's when they should have started the count. They didn't. The count ended early. Moshe was not back. They fell into a panic. The panic was aided and embedded by the Yetzer Hara, by the Satan, as we know. And Moshe comes down triumphantly holding the luchot, the tablets, after 40 days, 40 nights in heaven, only to see that the Jewish people are serving a golden calf. At which point, Moshe smashes the tablets. And that occurred today, the 17th of Tammuz. Another event fast-forwarding in history is that on this day, while the temple was surrounded and laid siege to, and not the temple, rather Jerusalem, and life became increasingly difficult. The Talmud tells us a story that under the prolonged, now this happened twice. We know that Jerusalem was laid siege to both in the Babylonian era, which is the first temple, and then by the Romans in the second temple era, and both times the walls were breached and the temple was destroyed. But during the prolonged Roman siege, the Jewish people were aware that this was coming, and they had actually stocked up provisions to outlast the siege. In fact, three great people, Ben Tzitzis Haskes, Nakdimon Ben Gurion, and Ben Kalba Savua, three great names. Ben Tzitzis Hakeses. What?
Great is a good word. Great Kalba Savua.
We'll talk. Yes, these were three tremendous philanthropists of the Jewish people, very wealthy men, very righteous individuals. Nakdimon Ben Gurion, he was called so because Nakad, the sun, held still in the sky on his behalf. It's a story. I mean, we don't get too caught up in on the tangent, but Ben Kalba Savua was called so, which means son of the satiated dog, which sounds not a very auspicious name. But in fact, it is because it is a name to describe his philanthropy. Anybody who came to him as starving as a dog never left until they were satiated. Any person he took care and he made sure everybody ate well. Any beggar, whoever it is that came to his door, ate well. And so that became his nickname, the one who made sure that everybody walked away satiated, even if they were as hungry as a dog. And Ben Tzitzis HaKeses meant this man was so wealthy, but yet so careful about the mitzvahs that he would pay somebody to walk around with pillows to hold the tzitzis off the talit. Back then they wore a talit all day. The talit and tefillin were not prayer accoutrements, but rather they were something worn the whole day. And he would pay somebody to keep his tzitzis from dragging on the floor by putting them on a pillow. That's how he invested in sanctifying mitzvahs. And these three individuals, between them, just them, one said, "I'm going to supply all the wood. I'm going to store in storehouses enough wood for the entire city to outlast a 10-year siege." And another one said, "I will stock oil to outlast the 10-year siege for the whole city." And one says, "I will stock flour." And so just between these three men, most of the essentials were basically covered. And yet, what happened was, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a great Jewish leader of the time. His own nephew, named Abba Sikra, was, you can imagine, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a charismatic individual, so charisma ran and leadership ran in the genes of the family. His nephew was the leader of the opposition force within the besieged city of Yerushalayim, a group of people known as the Biryonim, the ultra-nationalists that were spoiling for a fight with Rome, saying, we could win. Why are we cowering behind walls? We'll take them on in a fair fight and we'll win. And so what they did is, to force the fight, they burnt down the storehouses and plunged everybody in the city of Jerusalem into terrible poverty. And the Talmud
Jews
talks about
did that
how
to themselves.
What?
The Jews did that to themselves.
Yes. It's very interesting that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai later, after they had done this and really sealed the Jewish people's fate, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai summons this Abba Sikra to him, his own nephew. And he, by the time Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai finishes talking to him, Abba Sikra realizes his terrible, terrible mistake. But at this point, he's kind of, he's let a rampage that he cannot now contain. So he says, "I can't stop this now. They'll just throw me overboard and continue going." But he helped Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai get out of the walls of the city to make it to Vespasian, Aspasianos, who was then the general who was laying siege. Eventually became the Caesar. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked for three things. The three things were to spare the city of Yavne, to spare the dynastic line of Rabbi Gamliel, and to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Gamliel was the closest things they had to kings in the Second Temple era, other than the Hasmonean kings, the Maccabee kings, for the brief period where they had overthrown the Greeks, until they themselves had invited the wolf back into the fox back into the hen house. The last of these Hasmonean kings invited the Romans in, basically to bolster their own power, and ended up basically just giving Israel away to the Romans. But for other than that brief period, the Jewish people did not have kings, because they started the Second Temple era period under the rulership of the Persians, then immediately under the Greeks, and then from the Greeks to that brief period of the Hasmonean rule, but then under the Romans. But the one constant in terms of leadership was the line of Rabbi Gamliel. Hillel was the patriarch of that line. Then he had a son named Rabbi Gamliel, who had a son Rabbi Shimon, Ben Gamliel, who had a son Rabbi Gamliel, who had a son Rabbi Shimon Gamliel II, etc., etc. This was a dynastic leadership line, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, "Spare them." The closest thing we have to kings. And then Rabbi Tzadok was the holiest man. He had fasted for 40 years because he had sensed the spiritual disaster with the coming destruction of the temple. and he had fasted 40 years straight to avert it. And it's interesting because we're not sure where the reference exists first, but I'm sure we've all heard, unfortunately, more in Christianity than we are not in Christianity, but in the other religion than we heard in Judaism. But the idea, I think, about Buddha, it says that he was so thin that he was able to eat a grain of rice, and you would be able to see it work its way all the way down his gullet. This is what's actually the Talmud says about Rabbi Tzadok. So who got it first? It's a question, but the bottom line is that Rabbi Tzadok, and also Hushra Shina, his teeth had turned black from lack of eating anything and use, and so he was basically on death's door. And then when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai realized that when all his efforts will come to naught, and the temple will be destroyed, as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is basically reading the writing on the wall, he says that that might cause Rabbi Tzadok to tip into a point of no return when it comes to his health. And so he begged this Roman general that when all this does end up playing out, if the best Roman doctors can go and heal Rabbi Tzadok, so spare Rabbi Gamliel, spare Rabbi Tzadok, and spare Yavna the Chachamel, Yavna and its scholars. And later, the commentaries of the Talmud said, "What an idiot!" Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in that moment, or rather, not what an idiot Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was. They all obviously everybody acknowledged Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's great righteousness and brilliance. But what they said is, what a foolish moment he had, because he was asked by this Roman general, "What do you want? What can I give you?" And he should have asked for Jerusalem. He says, "Why spare Yavna? Spare Jerusalem." To which the response is, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is not the fool. You're the fool. If you think there's an expression tafasta meruba lo tafasta, you try to grab too much, you get nothing at all. The whole reason, the whole campaign was for the city of the Jerusalem. All the efforts and all the forces expended to surround the city of Jerusalem, and you think just like that, he's going to say, "Oh, spare Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, why not? Okay, we're going home. That's that wasn't going to happen." So rather, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's brilliance, knowing to a certain degree where this train was headed, was able to be clear-headed enough and had the presence of mind to say, all right, what can I ask of this general that will seem insignificant in his own eyes, immaterial to the bigger campaign, that he'd be easily grant, and yet at the same time would secure the salvation and the continuity of the Jewish people. And so he crafted it perfectly. He says, Yavna v'chachamel, that's where the center of Torah was going to be. He was going to move all the scholarship out of Jerusalem into Yavna. A little, up until that point, a relatively backwater town. So spare Yavna. Don't when you lay siege, when you take over, just let Yavna retain its autonomy. And then it said we need it because the Jewish people, their greatest necessity to be able to survive is Torah. And if Yavna would be spared, and the Torah and the yeshivas will be spared, the Jewish people will carry on, even if the temple is destroyed and the Jews are exiled. As long as they have the Torah, they'll be okay. So spare Yavna. And then as long as they have their leadership, Rabbi Gamliel and family, and they have their inspiration, the great righteous Rabbi Tzadok, if they have they have their inspiration for righteousness, and they have their leadership, and they have their Torah, it will be a very turbulent time, but we will survive it. And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, upon receiving this, had to turn his back on Jerusalem and know that he would later be, till the rest of his life, many would view him as a traitor, and that he gave up on Jerusalem, and that, as we see, even centuries later in the Talmud, they accused him of this. But now in life, we see Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. History has shown to be one of the times in history where one person single-handedly saved the entire Jewish people. And that's this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's insight and his bravery and his was to make this very, very, very difficult decision. First of all, to put himself in a way to risk his own life, as the story goes over there, to get even the opportunity to make this request, and then to make the request that he did about Yavna, about Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Tzadok, was really, God sends us our greatest leaders in our most precarious times. But why do I share this? I share this because we can appreciate how desperate the situation was within the walls of the besieged Jerusalem. And yet, they never allowed the daily offering in the temple to fail. Everything, however difficult life was and however difficult the situation was, if we can wake up in the morning and the offering could be brought, the morning offering, the daily karban tamid, right? The continuous and consistent offering is brought, then we can survive the day. Then there's some semblance of perseverance and normalcy, etc. Now, how did they do that? The Jerusalem's under siege, and there is the livestock runs out. Everybody's starving. There's no meat or whatever it is to be had anywhere. So where do they get a perfect lamb to offer on the altar every single day? So they actually, because they were so committed to this, they worked out. They contrived a scheme where they would lower a basket with gold, with bribes, to a Roman guard who would take the bribe and then would sneak one single animal into the basket, which they would then pull up over the wall. And so I'll pay out an exorbitant amount of money to keep this bribery going, but so that they could have the daily offerings and the solace and the sense of empowerment that the people got from the fact that no matter how difficult the situation is, the daily offering is still being offered in the temple every single day. Then came the day that this scheme was found out, and obviously the Roman the soldier who was arranging this was executed. And when the Jewish people, the Jews on the wall, unknowingly lowered the basket down with the bribe money, we felt the weight of the animal being put into the basket. They pulled up the basket. But instead of a lamb or a ram, inside was a pig. And it says the second that the hoof of the pig touched the walls of Jerusalem, the entire city shook. Because never had such an unclean animal ever been within the confines of the city of Jerusalem. And that was the day that, for the first time in hundreds of years, the daily offering in the temple ceased.
And that was also 17 Tammuz.
And that was on the 17th of Tammuz. So that was this day as well. Eventually, 17th of Tammuz, in the same time frame, becomes the day that the Romans succeed in breaching the wall, which begins and then becomes fighting within the streets of Jerusalem, really a massacre. Streets of Jerusalem start running red with the blood of the Jewish people. And this begins the saddest period in the Jewish calendar, or the sad period of the Jewish calendar, which will tip into the saddest period of the Jewish calendar. We know this as the 3 weeks. Okay, so then if you can stand on the chair, you see where the power strip is up there?
Look, it's about the sink of it.
Yeah, that white power strip. There's a little round button next to both where the yellow plug is plugged in and where that other plugs are all plugged in. To the top left of both those outlets, you just press that button and it'll turn on.
Close it.
What?
Or close the button or something.
The power strip is white and the button is white. The round button that's like just inset into the power strip itself. If you can't figure it out, I'll come out. So, anyways, the 3-week period is a period of national mourning. We don't listen to music. We don't take haircuts. We don't engage in overly indulgent acts. We don't schedule happy events for these 3 weeks. So we are in kind of in the similar to the state that we were in for between Pesach and Shavuot over the loss of Rabbi Akiva students. Also, is these 3 weeks. Some say it's more serious than the period of between Pesach and Shavuot. But either way, that tips into the truly sad and the saddest days on the calendar, which is in the middle of the 3 weeks. We get to the Rosh Chodesh Av, the first of the month of Av, which is starts the 9-day period, 9 days, and the 9 days ends with the 9th of Tisha B'Av, the day that both temples were destroyed, and also a confluence of sad things occurred. Another thing that happened on this day, and this is an interesting thing and a point to just discuss for a moment, was one of the reasons that this day is a national tragedy is this is the day that the Torah got translated into Greek. And you can say, hey, that doesn't sound like a tragedy. Why is that such a tragedy? The answer is because
So
of the
probably helped
circumstance.
assimilation.
Well, yes, but of a more specific kind, not just general assimilation, because the Torah can be in Hebrew and people can still assimilate, but it's a specific type of assimilation. But first, the context, this actually preceded the Roman siege, etc. But this was in the days that Israel was under Greek rule. A certain Greek Caesar decided to exert his tyrannical power to force the Jewish people. He knew that at the center of the Jewish people, their golden heritage is their Torah, and the Torah remained in a sense locked away from public access because it was written in Hebrew, a language that nobody was able to speak. And so this Greek emperor took 70 of the greatest Torah scholars of the time and locked them each in a separate room. And he gave them the task to translate the Torah. And just because he didn't want any funny business happening with the translation, he warned them that if any one of the 70 deviate from the rest, of the translations deviate from the rest, then all 70 will be put to death. So,
That's not the way translation works.
What?
Not the way translation works.
Right. I mean, it didn't have to be word for word, but it had to be if there was any truly kind of thematic differences, et cetera, because he was afraid that they might manipulate and change it for the sake of protecting certain ideas, et cetera, in the Torah. So he said, you're going to all translate it, and you're all going to translate it to the point where you can't play any games with it because it's going to have to match up with the translation of your other colleagues. This is available. This translation, the original translation, is still, we have it today. You may have heard of it. It's called the Septuaginta or the Septuagint. And Septu is 70. We call it Targum Hashivim. The Septuaginta or the Septuagint. Now, even though this was devastating, why was this devastating? This is devastating. Jerry was touching on this because the Torah is a incredibly holy and exact manuscript. It is God's perfect and eternal word. To translate it means automatically, even if the translation is perfect, Translations get it wrong. That's why if you ever want to appreciate poetry, you have to try to learn the language, right? To understand poetry in the original language that it's in, because there's nuances and ideas and context and word choices and atmospherics that cannot translate. And that is with just any language and nuanced writing in any language. How much more so when we're talking about the perfect word of God? Every word is exact, and every word, we know that the Talmud is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of even those who speak a fluent Hebrew, that in everything needs clarification and explanation. And that's just a layer of the Talmud. We're talking about millions and millions of words, billions, trillions of words devoted to the understanding of the nuances of the words of the Torah. And here, a crude translation that was going to be deliberately misunderstood and misinterpreted and abused. And so this was a very, very tragic day for the entirety of Jewish history, because this was going to take the Torah away from its guardians and place it in the hands of its cynics. And to a certain degree, we see the repercussions of it. Now, even in the darkest of times, God still shows his miracles, as we said with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his ability to still earn the salvation or bring about the salvation of the Jewish people, even in this darkest of times. And for example, with the Septuagint, there was an open miracle that occurred in the fact that as they sat to write the each sage in their own room, they very quickly encountered multiple problems that they had, which is that if they translated it literally, you can't get past the first three words and you have a really, truly big problem. Bereshit bara Elokim translates as the beginning created God. The beginning created God. This would actually perfectly align with the polytheistic and pagan beliefs of the Greeks. There would be proof in the Torah that there was something called the beginning that preceded God. Or so this is so if we translate this literally, we are going to get set up for such bad misinterpretation and such bad premises, such dangerous premises, that each one. So they sat there, and the sages are sitting there. Said, "Okay, I cannot bring myself to write the words as literally, knowing the damage it will cost, even if it costs me my life and the life of my 69 colleagues. I cannot be party to this mistake." This is what was in the mind of one of the sages. And so that sage changed it. And he wrote, instead of Bereshit bara Elokim, he wrote basically the translation of Elokim bara Bereshit. God created the beginning. And so they continue to write. So this fellow continues to write. Then he comes to the next section. And it says, Vayichul hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tza'am, right? We all know this, right? The final section of Genesis 1 talks about Shabbat. We mentioned this after the 6 days of creation, right? And he finished everything. He created. Vayichal Elokim, and God finished his work. On which day did God finish his work? On the 6th day, right? That's when he finished his work, and he rested on the 7th. But that's not what it says. Vayichal Elokim Bayom Hashvi'i. And God completed on the 7th day his work, which would imply that God was still working on the 7th day.
Therefore, we can work.
Well, right, which would then uh, 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 destroy any foundation for the concept of Shabbos. So what do you do? Now, what is the explanation to that? Actually, the explanation to that is two explanations. One is that God, in His perfection, finished in the very last moment of the sixth day. So the first moment of stoppage time was, in fact,
7.
day
That's when he was
7.
stopping, right?
But only God is that perfect. And most people, when you and obviously the Greeks, when they would read and God finished on the seventh day, would imply that there was some work going on the seventh day. The other explanation is that, in fact, God did create something on the seventh day.
Created Shabbat.
He created the whole concept of Shabbos. He created the concept of transcendence, of resting. Because God wasn't, resting isn't simply, as we said, the cessation of work, because God really wasn't working. It wasn't like God was schwitzing for the first 6 days. So what does it mean here? He rested. He created the very concept of rest, the idea of to transcend, to elevate beyond the doing it as it were. So that's what he created on the seventh day. He created the concept of rest. Either way, whatever the two explanations is, there wasn't time. There wasn't, or he wasn't giving them the opportunity to create a commentary off on the side, an asterisk, this Greek tyrant. Rather, they had to write literally. They had to translate literally, and to translate literally without context was setting up for disaster. Again, they're not even through chapter 1, and there's all these problems. So this same scholar changed it again. And he wrote, "Vayichal Elokim bayom hashishi," and God finished on the 6th day.
In other words,
Or
it translated as if it had said Shishi.
Correct. He didn't write. He didn't rewrite the Hebrew, but he translated instead, and God finished on the 6th day his work, the work which he had done. This, and so on and so forth. A total of 36 changes are detours from the literal that this rabbi made. And he came out with this heart heavy, knowing that he had just cost the lives of himself and the other 70 sages because of these changes that he could not bear himself to not make.
Unless
They all did the exact
all
same.
the translations were collected, and he looked them through them, and he said, "Great, they're all in sync." All 70 had made the exact same 36 changes. And so God's salvation comes in even in a dark circumstance and dark situation. So between these and these are the reasons that today is a fast day. Today is a fast day. In fact, it's the fast day that goes the latest of all the fast days, because even Tisha B'Av will be after the summer solstice, and will already be a little bit shorter of a fast. I mean, a little bit not shorter of a fast, because Tisha B'Av starts the night before, kind of like Yom Kippur. But it will be a fast that will end earlier in the day than Shiv Asar B'Tammuz on the 17th of Tammuz. So
Rabbi, it seems like the rabbi story, the 70 scholars, should be a holiday, should be a celebration.
Yeah. So the answer is because it's still at the end of the day. What this has opened up and allowed for is definitely a catastrophically net negative. Just that God didn't allow it to be such a negative that the scholars would be lost, or they wouldn't be inspired to make the changes, which would have led to even worse circumstances. So, and that's the point, that even in a negative, even something that is catastrophic, we can find the hand of God. As a parent, sometimes it's going to have to be a ouchie. Sometimes there's going to have to be consequence, and it's going to hurt. But this is one of the proofs that I'm still around, and it's not about me being vengeful. And the proof is I'm still on while this is happening with the one hand, with the other hand, I'm bringing about your salvation.
I'm letting you know I'm in this.
Yes, I am still here. I'm with you. Right? When God came to visit, to reveal himself to Moshe for the first time, he came, as I so often point out, that the word sneh does not mean bush. It means a thorn bush. And that is key to it, because God was saying to Moshe in his first revelation, I am here with you in this pain. I am alongside you. All right, so that's the 17th of Tammuz, which, as we said, starts the 3-week period, which ends with Tisha B'Av. Now, our hope is, as we said in the liturgy, the prayer liturgy today, of the Slichot, we said that every time each prayer ended with the same statement, that these days should turn around and become days of joy and happiness, because the same energy here that is right now pointed to the negative, and this is also makes that point. And perhaps it'll be how we connect the parsha with this theme, is that we look at these things and say it's thoroughly horrible and terrible, no redeeming quality whatsoever. But then we have to remember that this is all ordained by God. So is it in fact horrible, terrible? Yes. Is there no redeeming factor to it whatsoever? The answer is absolutely not. There is a redeeming factor to this. There is the fact that that if God is the one who's doing it, then there is a positive aspect to it. Give me one moment. If everybody give me 1 second, I'm getting. All right. So the what could be a positive from such a day and such horrific stories? And we haven't. If you read, there's an entire let's say section. It's more than a section, but it's a if you go into tractate Gittin, one of the tractates of the Talmud, there is an entire section there devoted to the stories and the depictions of what that period was like, with the destruction of the temple and the siege of Jerusalem, the siege of Beitar, the other major city, etc., and how horrible and horrific it is. And you say, so what could possibly be? How could a loving God bring this about? So there's two answers to this. Number one is, as we say, from the words of Jeremiah, we'll say them on Tisha B'Av, that God showed incredible mercy. Kila chamaso al eitzim v'alavanim. That God expended his anger against wood and stone rather than on flesh and blood. His destructive anger was against his own home rather than take it out on his people. The people messed up, and instead of God destroying them, he destroyed his home to teach them a lesson, but rather let the lesson come out of wood and stone rather than in flesh and blood. So right there is an indication of how much God loves us, because we really had earned that God should abandon us totally, forsake us to the wolves, which just by nature would mean that we wouldn't last. Right? What's kind of like was, as we saw with the Purim story. The second we said, God, we got it. Thank you very much. We'll take it here. We'll take it from here. We saw immediately that we cannot survive without God's help. So if God was to truly abandon us, we would not make it. Much less the fact that God could have taken his anger out on us rather than take it out on the building, as it were. The consequence of all our betrayals of God. But instead, he says, we said, thank you, God, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, the one who wrote the whole lamentation, still had the presence of mind to said, thank you, God, that you have chosen to take out your anger on a building rather than on your people. But the other aspect of this is why do we mete out consequence on, let's say a child has done something, and what's done is done, right? You can't repair the window, or you can't just. So then you mete out a consequence to your child. Why? Will that consequence repair the window? What's done is done.
No, but it might stop him from doing it again.
It is the right thing to do because if you love your child, you mete out the consequence. Yeah, there's no more down in the.
No,
Yeah, just see. Go check under. You know how to go on sinks in the lobby. You had to open up those doors. There's like a child lock. So on in the lobby here of the show, with the two sinks on them,
Yeah.
there's a child lock on the cabinets under those sinks. It won't open. But if you go, make kind of, where the prize thing is, on top of it is the bulletin board. You'll notice like something that looks like a little knob, like it's a white. Those are magnets. At the top corner of each door where they meet, you'll see a little sticker. You hold it and that trips the magnet. You could open the doors. In the cabinet on the right sink is a few more. Is a box of those with a few more. Not that many. Okay. So we have an expression. Ki es asher yehav Hashem yochiach. The one Hashem loves is the one that he disciplines.
Where does it say that?
It's a quote, actually, I think from either Yirmiyahu or from Yeshayahu. It's one of the Haftorahs that we read. So I can, well, give me a second. I'll pull it up and I will tell you exactly where it's from. I remember a story in my own life, and it's funny because it happened when I was really young. It had to be because we were in a house that we moved out of when I was like 6. So it's a story that stuck with me.
Wow.
But you'll hear in a minute here it is. It's Mishlei. I'm sorry. It's Mishlei. Proverbs. It's quote in Proverbs. So either way, the what's the story? In the back of this house that we moved out of when I was 6 or 7, I was over with I had a friend over from school, classmate, and we were digging a pit. We shouldn't have been digging the pit. It turned a part of the yard into a mud hole. With my friends, we were doing it, and I knew at the time that I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. And I also knew that I was definitely going to get caught, or we were definitely going to get caught. And I remember, like, this feeling of inevitability, but my friend wanted to do it. And you want to make sure that your friend knows that you're the coolest, the funnest place to be. To be with you is the funnest place to be. So if this is what's going to be fun, then we're going to do it, of course. So the peer pressure, right? And then, sure enough, we were not too far into it, and my father comes out, and he sees the pit, and he starts yelling at
You.
me.
Sure.
Only me. He's only yelling at me. And in my mind at that point, at that age, I was like, how is this fair? You're my tati. You're supposed to love me. So why am I the only one bearing the brunt of your yelling. Right? And I remember that later, after my friend had left, I went to my father with tears in my eyes, and I said, "Ta, it's not fair. Why did you only yell at me? You're supposed to be my tati. You're supposed to love me. So why did you yell at me?"
Only.
And what do you think my father answered? And stuck with me from the age of 6. I still remember the story.
Because I love you.
It's because I love you.
Because I love you.
He says, it really doesn't bother me too much what this other kid is
The
doing.
kid does, right?
You, it bothers me because I love you. I want you to do the right thing. And when you know that this was something that you shouldn't have been doing and you were doing it anyways, I need to set you straight. And that's why these days will be days of joy. It doesn't say that these days will just disappear from the calendar. When Mashiach comes, these days will disappear from the calendar. It says these days will become days of joy. Why? Because that element is already embedded in these days. Because what these days are is a manifestation of God's focus and attention, dare I say, his love on to us. It's just that right now we're getting one side of that coin because we deserved what happened. In fact, we deserved worse. And so God's love is manifest in this case, mirrors our behavior. His focus on us mirrors our behavior. Our behavior was not good, so the result of the day is not good. But that same focus, love, and attention, and dear, what God is hoping for that these days will achieve within us is that wake-up call. You know, it's interesting. There's an expression about the choshech kafel u'mechupol, the darkness and redoubled darkness. Choshech kaful u'mechupal. So what does it mean, redoubled darkness? It's dark. How could the darkness get more dark? And the Rebbe said in a Farbrengen, it was one of the few times that the Rebbe became so emotional. This was a man who lived through the horrors, perhaps the greatest confluence of horrors that the Jewish people ever dealt with. Communist Russia, with the Holocaust all happening, and he lost a brother and sister-in-law to the Holocaust, and he lost his father to communist Russia. In other words, it wasn't just something that the world was dealing with, it was something that he personally. And the Rebbe's stoicism, the Rebbe's ability to not become overwhelmed by emotion was legendary. Again, because alongside everything else, there's very few people who felt a responsibility for the entirety of the Jewish people and felt the personal loss of every single Jew like the Rebbe. And yet you can allow that to completely overwhelm you. But it was remarkable that even in very difficult situations in the lead up to the 6-day war, when everybody was turning to the Rebbe in panic and in despair, the Rebbe maintained an incredibly stoic attitude and was a source of optimism. And so there would be miracles. It's all I'm saying. One does not have to look too hard to find proofs of the Rebbe's incredible strength and stoicism. And yet, therefore, it makes the few times that the Rebbe does break down emotionally, particularly arresting. And take note. And it was a talk that the Rebbe was giving on actually right around this period, right before Shivas Tammuz, on the 12th of Tammuz, which is the birthday of the previous Rebbe, in the year 1984. And the Rebbe talked about what does darkness and redoubled darkness. It said sometimes, it says, the child acts in a way where they are taking their parents for granted, and this is a child who should know better, and are not learning their lessons, etc., etc. And so the father then does what he has to do. He hides himself. He pulls back, he hides himself. And what's the goal of the hiding?
Yeah.
Well, it's in the name. Hide and seek. The goal of the point of the hiding is so that they get so that the child will seek, will search, and when the child searches, if the child is searching, that makes the hiding worthwhile. It has awoken in the child this attitude to not take their Father in heaven for granted, but to seek out, to seek first of all out within yourself. What am I doing to drive this wedge? So that's darkness. Darkness is when God hides himself. But what is redoubled darkness? And here the Rebbe started to cry. It's when the child stops looking. So when the child stops looking, that's when it's truly dark. As long as the child is looking, they have not accepted the darkness. They are waging a war against the darkness, and they will eventually win over the darkness. Because that's what God has in mind in the first place. But we are granted free will. And the big danger is what happens if we stop looking. If we accept the darkness and we choose to live in it. But when a Jew says, I don't need Mashiach, I'm fine, I'm content, then that's not blasphemy. What it is a pity. It's a tragedy, is what it is. When somebody who's never experienced the light says, I'm fine in the dark, or more importantly, your soul has experienced the light, but you've just forgot it. We've forgotten what it feels like. And if we can go through a day like Shiva Asar Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, etc., and then say, you know what my big concern is? My big concern is, am I going to go on that vacation later this week? Then what you're doing is you're making peace with the darkness. You're being content with this circumstance and this situation. This is not the way we are meant to be living. This is not the situation where we're meant to be in. We brought this upon ourselves, and our loving and caring God, instead of just writing us off, is endeavoring to have us wake up and learn our lesson. Now, this is a precarious situation. This is a very precarious situation. Right now, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av are incredibly sad days. And they are indicative of a very incredibly sad period that we have been in for the past 2,500 years. But after a while, when you're suffering such excruciating pain, we can imagine that the Jews that were there, exiled, and had the temple, and now we're in exile, had been in Jerusalem, and we're now out in foreign lands, how excruciating it was, and how dire and desperate they called out to God to end this untenable situation. But like anything else, given enough time, you can get used to pretty much anything. And now we're used to living in the dark. I will finish on this one story. The parables always begin the same way, right? There was a king who had a son, right? His beloved crown prince. And he wanted this son to succeed him. And he needed the son to act prince-like. And the son just refused to take that responsibility, refused to step up into his position, etc., etc. The father said, you know what would be good for him? To get him out of the palace, to get him away from all these things, this cushy lifestyle and everything, and that it just with a flick of his finger is spoiled. He has to go see what it's like out there without all these trappings. And so the father sends his son, again, not a youngster, this is an older person, out. And as the son is going, the son says, is begging his father, saying, Father, I understand I'm wrong. I have to, please don't send me out. Please don't. And the king says, no, my son, you have to go out and you have to learn. You have to really, right now in the moment, of course, you're protesting. But I need this lesson to really be, to hit home, to really embed itself and have a lasting impact. And so you're going to go out there. And he sends the boy out. Years pass. And he used to receive regular requests from his son to come home, and he always said, no, not yet. We haven't. And then the letters stopped coming. And now he wants his son home. But he can't just go and tell his son, come home. No, he needs the son to ask it from himself. So he devises a plan. He tells the people of the town that I will be the king. Announcement: the king will be riding through the town in his chariot. The chariot will be moving at an incredible speed, and anybody who fires an arrow and the arrow with a request, and the arrow manages to hit the chariot, then their request will be granted. Now, why did he devise such a plan? Because his son was trained to be an incredible marksman. There was not a better marksman in the land than his son. And if anybody would be able to hit the chariot, would have that opportunity to be able to get his son's request, this was the avenue. Sure enough, he's driving through the town, and he's waiting, and he hears a thwack. One arrow manages to hit this very fast-moving chariot. He reaches down and he pulls up and immediately recognizes his son's handwriting. And he's so excited. His plan had worked. He had given his son a chance to
earn, maybe.
come home. And then he reads what his son writes. And his heart falls. Because his son writes to him. He says, "Dear King, I have one request to make. And I've been thinking about this long and hard." He says, "The income tax that I'm paying is a little too much. Do you mind dropping it a couple of percentage points?" And he realized that his son has forgotten that he's the prince, and where his true place is supposed to be, and what his true legacy is. And that is, in a sense, a cautionary tale. Our place is not here. This is not who we are. We belong in the Holy Land with the temple. The world needs the Holy Land with the temple. This state of exile that we've been in now for a very long time, we've made do, but we can never, ever become complacent and satisfied. We have to remember that these days of Shiva Tammuz and Tisha B'Av are meant to stir within us a great yearning to go home. And when we do, and these days help us achieve that yearning and to do what we're supposed to. And we're getting close because we've been hard at it for many, many, many millennia at this point, trying to refine the world, et cetera, et cetera. And we've talked about this, and many people could be cynical and look at the world and say, we are so far away from the goal. The world is such a horrible, terrible place. And the truth is that it's not that way. It's not that way. And by any sign, the world is far closer to Mashiach than it was when we got started. In fact, it's on the cusp of Mashiach. We just need to continue to push for it, continue to ask for it. May God grant us that the rest of this Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, we should already be celebrating in the base of Mikdash with the coming of Mashiach. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Wow.
All right,
Wow,
everybody.
what a class. I enjoyed it. In my
Thank
walk. Hi,
you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi, very much.
Thank you,
Bye,
Rabbi.
Bye, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank
Shabbat shalom.
Wow.
See you all. It's funny because my father had a friend who was a quirky, another Chabad rabbi with a quirky sense of humor. And there was once on a conference call with him and the other Chabad rabbis, etc., etc. And so they finished off like good any Chabad rabbi should have said, "See you in the base of Mikdash." So this one said, "Nope, I'm sorry." It says, "I'm not going to see any of you. I'm going to be too busy running around barefoot roasting barbecue." Everybody said, "What?" And then they realized he's a Kohen.
Right, he's a Kohen.
Ah.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful.
So, anyways, the point is, may see you all, Bezrat Hashem, in the base of
And
Mikdash.
may that guy be roasting barbecue.
Yes, exactly right. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.